Okay. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jeffrey.
So we've been designing websites for a long time, and we're here to talk about websites.
Yeah, we're here to talk about. We got like 40 minutes to get the entire future, present, and past of the web. We're going to tell you the whole thing in 40 minutes.
What periods, Jen, would you divide web design history into?
I don't know. You were making a great list earlier today. I mean, I think how many people were on the web in like 93, 94, 95, 96 maybe? So many people.
How many people were alive in 93, 90?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of us, a lot of people were not on the web then. It's really interesting.
But I guess technically my generation, it was different from our parents in that we grew up with television. And I think the next generation grew up with the internet. And my kid, who's 11, certainly, every device, she understands how to use them. I'm a designer. I've been designing for like over 20 years. And I'll get stuck. I won't know how something works. And she'll go, oh, it's really simple. It doesn't matter how badly designed it is. Like, I'll get stuck because I'm a designer with preconceptions, right? I'll go, oh, well, so logically these things are here, so the next one must be. The kids don't worry about that. She's just like, you know what I mean? When she was 2, doing little doll things, little dress-up things, and if suddenly the hair had a different interface than the makeup, that didn't bother her. It bothered me. I'm not playing anymore. But she was happy.
So the first, I think we were agreeing earlier that it feels like the first era of web design was that very first period where, I mean, the very beginning, what did you call it, the prehistoric?
Neolithic.
The Neolithic era. Where, every web page had a gray background. There was nothing available to really style much of anything at all. The links were going to be blue and underlined. Everything was going to be left justified.
Before Netscape.
Yeah, before Mosaic
Netscape,
even.
Right.
Before, or as Mosaic hit the market.
The first browser was it talked as well as listened, right? It was two-way. The first browser.
Oh, the
you
very
were supposed
first,
to
the Wild World Web browser.
The first browser was like, almost like an HTML version of Adobe Acrobat, because you would go to a document, and it was just marked up as a document, and if you wanted to change something, you could. Or the first browser was almost like Google Docs, or like a Microsoft Word document that gets shared around in an office so everyone can like make it slightly more mediocre, right? The first browser, you would go make comments, and that's the Neolithic period. That's the stone flint tools, right? Before steel. And then to me, the period where I entered and got really excited is 1995, when I call it the graphic design era. David Siegel and Clement Mock, these people with a graphic design background, Roger Black, like these legendary art directors came in and thought of it as graphic design. And that's where we got this sort of segmentation, right? Of you got developers over here and implementing, you've got designers in this room. Eventually you had information architects, but they didn't really talk to the designers. They were separate. Do you know what I'm talking? There was this sort of, Razorfish did this. They came up with like 25 disciplines. I remember hearing Thomas Kaspers in the 90s bragging because they just came up with, they'd just come down to with only like 17 words that meant designer instead of the 30 that they had been using.
It's funny because I think many of us think of that as a more modern thing that just came, just started happening in the last 10 years.
I think the segmentation, I know Razorfish, you could ask Karen McGrain, who was like their third employee and built the IA program there, but I think...
Yeah. And I'm having vague memories of like, oh yeah, that's right. There was a lot of complexity in language around those things.
To me, there were people like you and me and a lot of our friends who had some writing background, some design background, some code background, or taught ourselves what we didn't do and try to do everything.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Like one person would build the whole thing. You were called the webmaster.
Yeah, and then later you'd call yourself a designer, but you might not have ever gone to art school, right? And you were like learning, like you'd actually buy 1,000 fonts and use them all in your first piece, and then eventually you'd realize that that was a mistake. So there were people like with these foreshortened educations.
Well, and I think what we forget, because it's easy to forget, is that the print industry was also going through a giant evolution in its history and switching from film-based, paste-up-based layouts to desktop publishing. And so there was a lot of, and everything was very low resolution too. The pixels were giant. You'd print something out of an image writer with dot matrix printers, and like there was just a lot of low fidelity work out there at the time, and a lot of experimentation, a lot of like, oh my gosh, I have fonts, let me use all of them. Not just on the web, but in everything, in every poster, every brochure, even on television, the quality of like computer-generated graphics on television was really lo-fi, because we were slowly, the whole world was converting to digital. Digital was new, and the computers were still really not very powerful, so everything was very low res, but that was normal, so it didn't seem like a big deal. It was computers, like, oh my gosh, we have computers, it's the future, it's awesome.
Even computers, they were originally so big. I remember when I started in advertising, the idea that an art director would know all the typefaces, that's now, and that's the last 10, 15 years. But that was not the case when I was an art director, because you'd go through a book and like you'd sketch stuff, and you'd show sketched comps to the client and go through revisions. And then eventually, right, I see a couple heads nodding, eventually you'd work with a type house, which meant somebody would take you out for expensive lunch and drinks, and you'd spend $10,000 like setting something in Helvetica, right, and guessing what the line height was gonna be, right, and all that stuff, and then getting it back and cutting it up with an X-Acto knife to show them where you thought they could have done better. It was all very super primitive. And really, I mean, you know.
But what I remember from that era, what stands out when I think about it, is how much experimentation we were allowed to do, and how much everything felt like an open field, and you could kind of just make it up, because you were supposed to make it up, and there were not very many people who could do these things, and we all were making it up, and so it was okay. And everything was like really punk rock, or really like, wow, look at this, a crazy idea, that's so cool. And now it feels like it's very dangerous to do that. Like, I don't know, you get smacked down a sort of whack-a-mole conformist. You need to be like everybody else.
I think we've become more and more professional, for better and worse, right? For better and worse. I think in the beginning, a lot of it, my first clients were entertainment clients. So they basically just wanted people to come to the website and spend time there. And so the criteria of effectiveness were the same as the criteria for like designing a good billboard ad. If people know the Marlboro Man and smoke Marlboro, you did a good job. I didn't work on Marlboro. I'm just saying, like that was,
right,
you know.
Engagement. But in a very undefined way.
And
because people weren't actually using the web to do things at that point. It was just kind of like you go to get your email, you dial up your modem, you click on a couple links.
Like gaming, though.
Check out a couple things. Yeah, kind of like a game. Like you're going to spend some time on the internet, and then you were going to shut it back down again.
You show as a joke in one of your lectures. You show the website from Warner Brothers, terrible movie with the
Space Jam website?
Space Jam, yeah, but I worked on that. Right? and like the idea was just to make people kind of like what people do with Huffington Post now, goof off at work.
Yeah.
When they're supposed to be working, they're looking at the computer, right? But we were making websites to try to entertain people. I really thought of it at and I tried to be in, you know, film and television and music and all this stuff and failed. And I was like, well, now I can be an entertainer here. Yeah. It's a lower threshold.
It did feel like a bit of an artistic medium, a place to play, a place to be creative, to invent, to create something interesting. And I think, I've been trying to figure out, as I've been sort of deconstructing what's happening with layout right now, why was it that we felt free to do all sorts of layouts at that time? And I think it's because the technology was so rudimentary and so hacky that all of it was going to be a hack anyway, so you kind of do whatever you wanted. You were going to set your you're going to do your typography in image files, and you're going to use terrible HTML to make a layout using tables. So once you've already agreed with yourself that you're going to do that, then you could just kind of do anything you wanted and put anything you wanted wherever you wanted it to be. And
do you remember suck.com?
Yes.
There's actually, you can subscribe to a newsletter now called Suck Again. Yeah. And you can get old issues of Suck, like 20-year-old issues of Suck.com delivered to your mailbox. But they had an actual narrow measure, white space, line height. This is before CSS. Basically, they said like 8 words, then they'd have a new paragraph tag, 8 words, new paragraph tag, 8 words, new, and they used the Netscape center tag to center it. And they did a whole bunch of other super hacky stuff, which made it completely useless as markup. Like if you were a blind person trying to read that content, it wouldn't make any sense. If you had a screen reader reading it out loud, it made no sense. But as a visual layout, and this is how we thought of the web, it was a visual medium first. And I think there were no rules. I also think there wasn't that much money at stake. Like if something went wrong on a Warner Brothers site, who cares? I mean, if something went drastically wrong, like people died, people would care. But
no, but like the airline website was sort of a brochure for the airline. It wasn't a place to actually buy airline tickets.
But once you're buying tickets, if something goes wrong, and I think some of the professionalism, and then I think it was great that one of the other speakers was talking about this too, how designers go from initially being really excited about like dribble and that kind of showing off how talented you are, and eventually become more user-focused, like, well, how can I actually help people? What can I actually allow people to do? I think that's really exciting. But
and maybe we did that as an industry as well.
We did that as an industry, and it was good, but in some way that made us more regimented, and we started, saying, well, everything's 1024 by 768, and everything's these columns, and we have to have a sidebar because that's where we can hide the ads, and all that stuff.
Yeah, we don't have any slides, but I just, on Twitter, if you go to my account, Jen Simmons, I retweeted several, there's this robot that does screenshots from the Wayback Machine and just periodically tweets them. It's Wayback_EXE. And sometimes I look at them and I'm just like, wow, do you remember when sites looked like this? It's so hilarious. So I just retweeted a couple of those like an hour ago just so that you could see them if you're interested in looking at that.
Some of the stuff, including a few of the things I got to work on, were really beautiful.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know what we were doing. And they were beautiful within the limits of if you had a 600 by 400 monitor with at least 16 colors.
And you could see.
And Netscape 1.1, and you could see, and all that stuff. But I think one of the most painful things that's happened most recently is the explosion of frameworks.
Right. So we went from, if we want to follow a little bit of a chronology, but we should jump ahead and move faster, is we went from all those table-based layouts to floats, and things became much more standard and much more just like sidebars, and I mean, there's still a lot of creativity, but it feels like, to me, it feels like that was sort of the beginning of some of the more conformity that's been going on.
I think it was ingenuity instead of creativity. The first thing was we don't know how to do anything, and nobody knows what this medium's supposed to look like, and we're going to do whatever the hell we want. And that was really fun. And then and then it started being, okay, well, now that we have some CSS, can we make 2 columns? We know how to do it in tables. Do we know how to do it in CSS? Oh, can I use italics? In Internet Explorer, if I use italics, my layout falls apart. What can I do about that? And almost a different kind of designer stepped in and said, okay, like, big idea person, that's great. Your time has passed. Now I'm the detail person who's focused and can tell you exactly which version of which browser has which hack in it that we can use to like work around which bug.
Yeah, it does seem like the stakes started to get raised, like it mattered that the site actually worked. And more of the business for sites that were run by businesses started to actually care about the site working and staying up consistently. And
right, which is how we got so professional. I also think everything's really cyclical. Like a few years ago, people were proclaiming with great excitement that it was possible to design in the browser. And that's what we did when we started. Yeah. Right?
I never stopped doing that.
You never stopped? I started feeling amateurish after a while. I'm like, well, I should really do this in Photoshop first so it looks better. So the fake layout it will never actually look like is more pleasing to the client.
Yeah. But then we do, it does feel like today we're in this world of a lot of frameworks and a lot of design, visual design, layout design driven by frameworks and driven by, I don't know, I feel like sometimes there's this real pressure to be efficient. And folks were talking about it earlier today. And I think when you're working, especially with a large team, it's really important to have tools and support so that you can be efficient. It's super important. But I wonder about I don't know, it feels like for a moment here, and I don't think it's going to last, I think it's going to be a moment, but for this moment, somehow after responsive design, as we were trying to figure it out, up until what's coming next year, things have seemed really stagnant. Things have seemed really like everybody's got to do things the same way. Everybody's got to use some sort of like flat design and, build a system. There is no time for figuring out a lot of detail on this. We're not going to get creative. We're just going to use Bootstrap. We're just going to kind of like Mad Libs or fill in the blank, some sort of fill in the blank thing. Yeah, plug and play.
Let me ask you a question. How many of you actually do web-related design work? Okay. How many of you use Bootstrap? How many of you enjoy it?
Oh, okay. That's a good question.
Okay. For those who like it, like why? What is it that you like? You can just shout it. You can press the button. Okay, so you can prototype quickly and show.
Easy to communicate with developers, is what you said.
Yeah, so you can make something that almost is like the way the developer will code it, right? Okay, what else? How many of you write your own HTML? Okay. Well, it's all in that side of the room. That's weird. Okay. And how many of you use Photoshop as part of your process?
How about that? The only tool that you have to communicate design? Because I think it's great to use Photoshop. The thing that frustrates me is when it's sort of the only communication tool. Like you do it in Photoshop, you make a PDF, and then you email it, and that's it. There are no Excel spreadsheets. There's nothing else.
Is there anyone who only uses Photoshop to communicate a design at this point? I don't think so.
No, look at that. Yeah.
Sketch?
Yeah.
Conversations? How many of you work in places where the developers are here and the designers are here and like maybe there's some like 5 other disciplines that sort of slide stuff over a transom? How many of you have that, and how many of you work in very collaborative environments? Cool, that's great.
Yeah. That's a big shift, right? We went through this. It seems like we went through this era in the middle of the 2000 whatever they're called, knots, where design were like these special people. Maybe they worked at a different company, and the developers were over here, and they weren't even really allowed to know each other's names, let alone have a meeting.
If you were a designer and could write your own CSS, you were called a unicorn. Mm-hmm. They can write their own code, Then people would argue whether that was really code, but that's another thing too.
So what else do you think about the changes in the way that design has, the way design has changed? What does it really mean in our understanding of the web as a medium and our understanding what the heck it is that we're, maybe not the project that we're working on right now this month to ship by the deadline, but over the arc of our lives, this medium has been invented and we are the people who make the stuff for it. What in the world are we doing?
I think the evolution that we've had is that I don't think we're looking at it primarily as an artistic medium at all. Mm. And we could do more of that for sure. But I think what we're looking at it as is something that people are connected to all day long. Whether it's a phone, something they're wearing, a browser, and I think we know that people will start something, like they'll start something in their web browser, continue it later on their phone, maybe continue it later in on a different device, and that everything that we design has to work from place to place. And we're trying to figure out how to make experiences that, how do you make an experience where your brand is consistent, not just make the design work, right? Not just Ethan Marcotte's brilliant idea of responsive design, not just make the layout work in all these devices, but have the brand experience work in all these devices, even though that experience is different. I don't want my phone to work the same way a desktop browser works. And I don't want a giant background image in one place, and I might in another place, and yet it all should be fast. It all should let me focus on what I want to do. It should all be there with little details of pleasure if I notice them. But if I'm just busy and in a hurry and I don't want to notice them, that's okay too. Folks were talking about invisible design earlier. right? Which can have several different meanings, but I don't know. I think as long as we're focused on users, we're doing something right. If we can bring more artistry to it and more creativity to it, that would be great. Because I, like you, I'm very tired of here's the big photo, here's the 2 smaller photos, and here's the 3 columns. I'd love to never see that again. Right, and on the phone, they all slide under each other. Every time I start a project now, I try to think, what have I never done before? There's a Hall of Fame art director from the 60s, whose name I can't think of right now. German guy, brilliant guy, Helmut Krohn. And he said, every time he got an assignment, he thought, what can I do with the page that hasn't been done before? And I think on top of making sure it works for people in all their devices, if we could really think like that every time, what can I do that will be unique, delightful, different, that I haven't done before, that I don't know how to do, that I don't have a tool that can help me do? That would be a fantastic way of moving it forward. I don't know, what do you think?
There's I was just traveling in Brighton and I found this little book in a bookstore about VU magazine, VU, which is this magazine that came out 1928. It started publishing. It's a French magazine, was a French magazine. And it ran, I guess, until the Nazis showed up. So 10, 12, I don't know, a while. But it was remarkable because it was the very first magazine that used a different kind of printing process. And the press was very different, but the press technology isn't really what fascinates me. It's the layout process that I'm obsessed with these days. And up until this shift to rotogravure into offset printing, everything was letterpress printing. So everything was literally physical metal type, whether it was cold metal or hot metal, and it was blocked in to a form of some kind, which meant pieces of wood and pieces of metal were stacked together, and then paper or some other technology was used to make the printing go from there. And so there was some play, especially in the Soviet montage era and the Bauhaus movement, and like to put things on an angle or to change a little bit to break up, put more white space to make the columns sort of not standard columns. But there was a lot of constraints to that. Where when VU magazine came along, they really innovated a whole bunch of processes where everything became film. And the film was basically, everything that went on the page was basically cut out. They were still typesetting with metal, but they would typeset with metal and they'd create one proof and then they'd cut that out. And they do what many of us did later, which is the way that I was trained in the 80s, which is, everything's a piece of paper that goes through a wax machine. You take an X-Acto knife and you put it on a poster board. You draw the blue lines, you measure how big everything's supposed to be, and then you just put it wherever you want it to be. And so this book is gorgeous and amazing. And one of the men who was a creative director at VU ended up coming to the US, and he was like a big famous creative director at Condé Nast, one of the first ones who really changed what Condé Nast was doing. It changed everything. Life magazine and Time magazine both took a lot of inspiration from VU. And they really sat there, and in this book, it lifts because in the magazine they talked about the process of making the magazine, and they talked about it as an artistic medium and as they were well aware of what they were doing. Here we are, and we're going to change what a magazine is. And what they took their inspiration from was film. They were very well aware of film newsreels, which is, the newsreel that they would play before feature film. If you went to the movies, they'd show you, what was going on in World War I or whatever. Here's the 5-minute newsreel to let you know what's up. And they wanted to make a magazine that was like a newsreel. They weren't even thinking about making a better print magazine. Well, of course they were, but they were more than that. They talked about it as a paper version of a newsreel. So they were like, how can we take film, which is this moving thing, and take a lot of the inspiration from cutting a film and montage and this and that, and bring it over into print, and use all these new technologies with using film in the printing process to create this new thing that hasn't ever existed before. And in fact, if you look at it, there's a lot of things that they're doing in their magazines that we don't do today in magazines, like taking 3 or 4 photos in it that were shot several seconds apart and lining them up next to each other so that they sort of tell a story through these visuals or this timeline of visuals. Amazing work, anyway. So it just, to me, it's like an example of work that is very practical and very commercial, and yet is made from this deep understanding of the medium and the evolution of the medium and what could be done next with the medium. And I take a lot of inspiration for that. And I think about the web and like wanting the web, more people in the web industry, not everybody, but more people in the web industry to have a chance to do that level of thinking and that level of innovation in their work.
It sounds like the closer you are to the technology, the better. Like those designers weren't just sitting in a room dreaming stuff up. They were using the tech.
Yeah.
They were using the film and saying, okay, well, what does this let us do?
And it wasn't just designers, it was everybody. It was the people who were going to run the presses who could say, yes, we could do this, no, we can't do that.
Design is everybody's job, as we were just hearing. But so then maybe in the same way, if you know about CSS, different kinds of CSS3, you know, if you know about grid layout and Flexbox, you go, okay, what will this let me do that I couldn't do before? And then extrapolate backwards from that to what's my product, what's the product idea, what does the user want to do, but what new thing in what new way can I let the user experience that or try that? I think one of the places where there was a lot of innovation, web people sometimes feel hostile toward apps and app people, right, or threatened by, or like inferior, and so we have to make our websites just like apps. But one of the nice things about apps is that was a place where you'd see the innovation, like when the app that preceded, that the Twitter app's based on, when they did that little thumb, you could find something new by almost...
The pull to refresh.
Yeah,
and that little sound, a little pop sound.
Nobody had done that, and it wasn't particularly discoverable. You kind of had to have a friend tell you about it. Or you might accidentally discover it and not know what you'd done. How did that happen? Right? But a lot of times in apps, people do. I mean, sometimes it's ridiculous.
No, there was a lot of innovation somehow.
Yeah.
When the apps first showed up, it was like, hey, we can redefine this space. It doesn't necessarily have to scroll vertically. Maybe we want to scroll sideways, or maybe we want to not have scrolling, or maybe we want to... Yeah, there was a lot of... In a way,
we should be learning from them, not like, oh, we should make our websites more like apps. That's the wrong lesson. But what creative, amazing thing can we do with how people interact? Especially since people are touching it more and more, right? Since less and less activities on the desktop, more and more is on devices. They're basically doing app-like stuff. They're dragging their thumbs and pinching. Did you ever try to zoom on a piece of paper? I'm getting so old that I can't see really tiny print, and I got some I was printing out a ticket, an airline ticket, and it had some fine print, and I was like, what is this that they can take my they can confiscate my bag? What have I agreed to? So I couldn't see it, so I actually pinched. I went and then I realized what I was doing. But this is our world now. So what things can we do? If there's one thing people could take away that they could try doing differently, to make their layouts more exciting, more inspired, what would it be, in your opinion?
To me, the thing that's going to change everything is this new CSS property called Grid, CSS Grid Layout. And it is not available in any browser yet, but it's not available in normal people browsers. But if you go and get one of the, cutting edge nightly canary browsers, it's in those browsers. Or if you flip the flags, if you know what that is. If you want to check it out, the easiest way to get the most complete implementation is just download Firefox Nightly. You go to nightly.firefox.com or nightly.mozilla.com. Anyway, Firefox Nightly. Download that. It will work. But I mean, you know this, Jeffrey. I got 6 examples of new layouts up at labs.jensimmons.com. And the things that...
And you're working on Layoutland, too.
Yeah, layout.land. Layout.land is going to be like a gallery of... remember CSS Zen Garden?
Like a next generation CSS Zen Garden.
It's like a next generation CSS Zen Garden. A place where we'll be able to post new ideas and see other people's work and just play together, play and experiment.
And I would say, going away from the technology, what I would say to try to come up with new layout ideas is come from the product. When I was in advertising, if you came up with this, well, we're going to have Seinfeld come out and he's going to do this, and they were like, what does that have to do with the product? That's ridiculous. But we have this great suitcase. Well, we have a gorilla trying to break the suitcase. Okay, that comes from how hard it is to hurt that suitcase, how well it's made. That's a legitimate creative idea. A creative execution that dramatizes some benefit to the product, that's a good idea. Something that's funny, but you could do it for any product, that's a bad idea. Right? You see this all the time. Half the Super Bowl ads are just, sleazy jokes that have nothing to do with the product. So in the same way, when we have something people are trying to do, and I don't think we should go back to like the 1990s when if you had an airline site, you tried to make it look like an airplane reservation desk. I don't think that's the way to go. But think of the concept of what people are doing. One simple example, I just launched a little studio in New York, and I was trying to think what should the copy be to position this studio, and it turned out for various reasons it needed to feel like a letter that I had written, a personal letter. And then it was like, okay, well, how would I have done that in the 90s? I would have made like, a fake letter on a table with shadows and everything. And then how would I have done it in the mid-2000s? I would have done a skeuomorphic thing where like from the desk of, and that was kind of funny. We wouldn't do that now in the era of material design. I was like, but maybe I could use modern, very simple design to emulate that kind of skeuomorphic thinking in a sly way. And so I had seen Jen's presentation about doing different things, and I said, okay, just rotate the text and put a little drop shadow and it'll look like it's a letter. Simple as that. I'm writing a letter, that's the concept, so let's make it look like a letter. So the layout came out of that, and then so it became an angle, and Roland, who is here, did a JS fiddle to see if you could rotate the text and have it still be readable, which fortunately it was, because I wasn't going to have a better idea. But so it's sort of a marriage. It's the technology coming into support. I have a friend, Dan Mull, and whenever he starts a new project, he designs stuff off in a corner, and his developer creates stuff off in a corner, and they don't talk for like a week, and they just do experimental stuff that's inspired by the idea of the product, whatever it is. And then at the end of that week, they show each other their stuff. And maybe the developer did this strange animation based on that Dan can grab and use in some way for a design idea, or maybe something Dan designed, but it's not fully fleshed out yet. The developer will say, I know how to bring that to life. But if you sort of collaborate separately, like do something individually, like go off in your equivalent of sketchbooks and then come together, it can create an exciting new thing which you would not going to do if you're using a framework.
Or give yourself a week at the very beginning of a new project to just play around.
To just goof off.
Yeah, just to see what happens.
Yeah, another thing I like to do is just avoid the project completely and like play in Pinterest or take photographs or something, or watch a lot of movies, or it seems like I'm not working, but I am.
Yeah.
Right? And designers in the room, you know what I'm talking about? Right? Or you go to a bunch of art galleries and it seems like you're not working at all, but you're going to design something as a result that you wouldn't have otherwise. You really are working.
And I think for anybody who's worked in other mediums, it's a very familiar part of the process, whether you're doing film or theater or music, it's really common.
Yeah. But I like to call it goofing off. I really don't like to be pretentious about it, and call it seeking inspiration, because it's, come on.
Right.
Questions?
Yeah. You should use your microphone. I think you have to push. There's a button, like a hard.
Yeah, you got it.
A black. Yeah, there.
All right. Okay. So, like when y'all were talking about how when design really started coming into play and everything was new, so people were just playing around, and then the rules got cemented, and then people were like, "No, you can't do that," and they started putting up structure. When Apple went against the grain and came out with that multicolored logo, everybody was saying, oh no, your logo can't have that many colors. They went against the grain, came out that multicolored logo, and then boom, success. Again, they went against the grain when they came out with that gradient on the logo. People like, no, you can't have gradients. They did it anyway. Boom, success. How does a designer know they're at that point where I'm about to do something innovative will it be a failure or a success, or do they even know? Is that a leap of faith, or is there a sign that can tell you?
That's a good question.
I think experience helps a lot. I think you try it, and after a while, you get a sort of a sense of which ones work, and sometimes you really don't know. Try it on users, try it on people, show it to other designers, show it to people who aren't designers. There was a great Silicon Valley episode where they showed everything, right? They showed their platform to all the other engineers, and all the engineers thought it was brilliant, and then the public hated it because it was designed for engineers. It wasn't designed for the public, so don't just show designers.
I think you're hitting on something that is actually the advantage right now to everything looking so much the same. Because everything looks so much the same right now and we're feeling bored, if the public isn't already feeling bored, they're going to very soon. And there is a great opportunity to take a risk at this point and to have it pay off big. I don't know that you ever know that ahead of time, though. I feel like the more any of us has tapped into something that's creative or artistic or comes from a place that isn't just user test, like data driven, but comes from a place of like going after what's not measurable. You think and you've tested a bit and you've tried things out, but and I think on big projects it can be harder, big money projects, it gets harder and harder and harder to take those kinds of risks. Executives who are in charge of saying yes, it becomes very hard for them. And maybe on other kinds of projects it's easier, but
free side projects are a great place to do that.
Like just go for it and see what happens.
Because if you've got a $100,000 project and your boss is saying nobody's going to eat this month, it's harder for them to. Also, they're not designers. It's harder for them to just get excited by an idea. There was someone in the back. Yes, hi. Yes. Pink hair.
I think we need the person who just asked a question to turn your mic off, actually, now. And then yours might work.
The lady with the pink hair in the back.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just very curious about also how we're talking about Bootstrap and the accessibility of also creating websites for people that don't know that much about websites. So say there's all these boot camps now for people to code. We have all these CMSs out there that make you create a website in one day. And it's given accessibility to a lot of people. But on the other hand, there's guys like you that really take care of the craftsmanship in web design. And I don't want to make you biased. I want to know what is your opinion on that, how all these people coming in and almost consider themselves web designers and all these other people trying to break the rules, and how all this plays in the future of web design.
I feel like there's like 4 questions in there. I think it's great that there's tons of new people coming into the industry. I especially hope they're coming from a wide range of different flavors of human being and not kind of one typical flavor. And I like that. I'm really glad. And I hope that people are able to come in with a lot of fresh ideas. I think we need some new fresh ideas. And I know, especially when you're young, especially for me, when I was younger, I was so scared all the time. I wanted to do it right. I wanted to figure out what other people were doing and copy them, because that's how you're supposed to do it right. So, I hope that not just in design work, but in all of life, that we each have the guts to go with ideas we have and not necessarily be too afraid and to only conform.
But I do take your other point. I'm thrilled to see so many people being empowered to code, and all these boot camps and all these people learning to do it that never did it before. I think that's great. They're the next generation. Amazing things are going to come out. But I do hope they're also learning about the things that some of us learned the hard way, like progressive enhancement and accessibility and structured markup. And I worry that they may go through the same kinds of Wild West bullshit that we went through of, like I was saying about suck.com, where you use markup just to create an effect and don't worry how it works and don't realize that you're making it hard for some people to access your content. Or more realistically, you use a platform that has to have JavaScript and all the scripts have to work, and it's really heavy. And if one of the scripts doesn't fire, no page loads. And you don't know that. You're so excited by all the JavaScript and all the different tools you can use that you forget that there should be a simple experience that works for anybody, even if they're using a Palm Pilot. You know, if it can read HTML, someone should be able to get, you know, somebody should be able to experience your website no matter what. That's really important, and I don't think that's being taught.
Yeah, I do think that there are a lot of lessons that the industry as a group learned the hard way, and a lot of ideas that we tried out that turned out to be really bad ideas, and we undid those ideas and we went another way. And it is weird. In like the last 5 years, it feels like suddenly there's a whole new generation of folks who weren't there when we figured out that you should separate your content from your styling, or that you should care about accessibility, or like so. And I think that that's a challenge to the industry to figure out how to do a better job of explaining these fundamental principles that we figured out and handing them down to the next generation, so that as people come along and they just want to like, get rid of CSS, it's terrible, let's use JavaScript for everything, be like, actually we tried that, it was called Flash, it really sucks. Good luck with that. Oh yeah, look, you just decided that actually having style sheets is a good idea and inlining all your styles is a bad idea. Yeah, we learned that.
Or those old arguments like, well, we're a TV network, so we don't have to do anything for blind people. Like, yeah, you do. That's not right. But you weren't around the first time we all argued about that, so somebody's going to have to, you know, and it makes sense logically. I see why you think that, but it's not actually true.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, you know, and it's tough when everybody's sort of on a deadline and the code schools are 12 weeks long and, you know, everybody's trying to just like get job skills. Like, but I believe we need to make space in the industry to have some of this wisdom and some of these bigger issues, this theory, that whatever it is you want to call it, and be able to like hand down these things from person to person.
I also think a lot of people are getting empowered to have the tools to make stuff, and people are making stuff because they can, and not enough people are still thinking about should I, or who could this hurt. I think it's really important to think, who could I hurt? Who might I be seriously offending or injuring? There was my partner, Eric Meyer, business partner, a year ago, his daughter died on her 6th birthday. And then Facebook, 6 months later, sent him the picture he took like the day she died and said, hey, Eric, your last year was awesome. Here are some fond memories, and showed him a picture of his daughter, and he was just starting to like not want to kill himself when he got up in the morning. And he had to see that, and it had balloons and stick figures dancing, because somebody at Facebook, you know, thought, and it was an awesome idea. It would be an awesome idea if you partied all last year. It would be an awesome idea if it was showing you pictures of your trip to Mexico or your, you know, your great party. But if it was showing you a tragedy, and so he wrote a book about this with Sarah Watcher-Betcher, and a lot of people talked to Facebook about it, and it seemed like they'd learned something. And yesterday, I have been collecting on my phone, I've been collecting these neo-Nazi hate newspaper things about Obama and about Jews and just horrible shit, right, that these people had written. And Facebook took that off my phone and pictures of my daughter when she was 5 at the beach, and made a little video called Sunday Afternoon. And it's got tinkling piano music, and honest to God, it's like, there's a picture of a house on a beach, then there's a picture of my daughter when she's 5 playing with making a sandcastle, and then there's a picture of a rabbi fondling a child. Right? Okay? So they haven't learned, and this is a year later. And I love it, it's hilarious. Like, it didn't offend me, it's actually hilarious. But the idea that they never learned, that someone else goes, hey, you know what we could make? And it's like, so I hope that when people are getting empowered and learning, and we have all these new coders, I hope they're also learning about people, and that you have to think about people first, because you could really hurt them. Right? There's the famous story of privacy rules changing on Facebook and a family being destroyed because a daughter hadn't come out to her very conservative family yet as being gay, and they weren't ready to handle it, and Facebook made the decision that her dad should know before she was ready to tell him. They weren't trying to hurt her, but it was, you know, we have a lot of power in the things we make, and it's really important to think about people.
Yeah, we don't talk about ethics enough. Like, even just like take an ethics class in the middle of your web design program. Well, there's a question right there. Yeah.
Okay, so you just brought up the question I was going to ask. And I was wondering that because there's so many people using mobile devices now, and it's not really something you can get away from, every time you pull out your phone, there's so many notifications on your from different apps that you're using. And I feel like it's so hard to concentrate, it's so hard to, just think at all. Because the thing about too much technology is, and even too much like user interfaces, it's a lot of things that you consume. You're not really making anything anymore. And I think a big concern and something that people aren't really talking about is, what do you think we should do to like make sure people are still in control of their time and still in control of like what they choose to do without, being forced to see tons of notifications all the time?
Yeah, I think that, especially since the phones have showed up, our lives have changed pretty drastically. The way that human beings who live in a world like the one we live in New York, where we all have phones, we all have always on internet, the way we communicate with each other has just changed so drastically. And some of it's great. I have a lot of friends in the UK. A lot of them I met in person or met at some event, but stayed in touch over Twitter, and then worked with them because I had stayed in touch with them over Twitter, and then because I'd worked with them, then I go back and see them again. And like now, 5, 6, 7 years later, they're good friends of mine. But then at the same time, what is it really like to have friends that you kind of never talk to using your mouth, where you only text them all the time? Like, what does it mean to be inundated with so much information constantly? I've personally been trying to break some of those habits because I feel like, my Twitter account will turn 10 years old next year, I guess, next March. And I feel like I'm kind of done. And not done with Twitter, but like done with looking at my Twitter feed for a good hour or 2 hours every single day as one of the fundamental parts of how I live my life. I'm kind of done with that, right? Like, and I don't look at it an hour or two a day anymore, but I don't think. But it's really easy to, like, my phone's next to my bed. I wake up, I'm sleepy, I want to wake up, I reach for my phone, I start reading Twitter, and then I'm angry, and then I'm sad, and then I'm overwhelmed. And then what do? I just keep let's put more information into the system. Let me overwhelm myself even more. And I think it's hard. I think we don't even know how it's changed us, and we don't really understand how it's changing children and the way that their brains are developing. I don't think we understand how we've changed our own, like physically, we've literally changed our brain chemistry by doing this behavior. And it's like, well, every little, I've mentioned Twitter, but it's not really just them. It's like, okay, every little, I don't know, it's some sort of each thing is just a drop of water, but it's a drop of water in a aquarium that I'm standing in, and the water is getting higher and higher and higher and higher, and everybody's just responsible for one drop of water, but all the water together, like, so yeah, I mean, there's some really great books written on this subject that are sitting in my apartment, not read, because I'm both very interested and very scared or like, I've done things like, let me stop reading so much online and just read paper books. And I sit down to read a paper book, and I'm so scatterbrained. And I read a page, and then I realize I haven't even really read the page, and I need to like start over and read that page a second time. And I'm like, this is just what I need to do, because I need to retrain that ability in my brain. I need to like remap those neurocircuits to be able to sit down and read a book for an hour and not have this impulse to pick up Twitter, or this impulse to go watch TV instead, or this impulse to do. So I mean, the good news is that each of us can make those decisions on our own and for our personal lives. Like, oh, my phone is no longer in my bedroom. My phone is always just, I use my watch in my bedroom. I use my phone not in my bedroom. But I don't know, it's tough. And when I really start to think about what we've done to society, on the one hand, it's very excited, especially those of us nerds get all excited about the fancy new robots and the fancy technology, and technology is always wonderful. And it's like, yeah, no, it's not always wonderful. And it's not just the Luddites it used to just be Luddites who were like, this might be dangerous. And they were wrong. But those of us who have skills around this, I think it's helpful if we could have more conversations about when we want to do this or not do this or whatever.
Let's recognize that we're successful to some extent in this industry because we're obsessive compulsive ADHD type people anyway. So if it wasn't this, it would be some other drug. And to some extent, we get off on the addiction, compulsion thing that happens. I do think it's important to set your own limits. Like, I turn off notifications on most apps. And I have periods where the phone's not gonna ring. Even, and I'll be like, even if it's my dad, even if he's dying, I'll find out the next day, what, you know, like, I tell myself super harsh stuff like that so I can be okay with it. I do yoga and like don't have the phone in the room when I do that, don't have the phone in the room when I work out, like that stuff is kind of sacred. It's weird, I was very much of a, I remember I had a friend, she was having an argument with her boyfriend, and she handed me the phone, this is like a long time, this is before the iPhone, before they were cool. She handed me her like little clam flip phone, she was like, oh, you talk sense to him. And I just handed the phone back to her and I said, I take calls at home and in my office. Just like I was 100 years old. But I mean, there was kind of something to that, which went by the wayside once we had the smartphones we have now. And we are turning into some kind of Cronenberg-like new species, like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. We don't even realize it's happening to us. I do think, I use graphic novels and comics as a way to, because I also lost the ability to read books from using all this shit all the time. I was a voracious reader and now I can't read. So now I'll just go to a comic book store and get like Jack Kirby book because there's the extra adrenaline of the pictures. And if I have words and pictures, then that can train my mind to look at paper objects again. It's like, this is what I'm doing. I'm like someone learning to walk again or...
Yeah, I mean, I want my ability to focus back. I don't think that it's a diagnosis that I have permanently. I think it's a temporary condition based on how I've been behaving, and I just need to change how I'm behaving. But anyway, we're totally out of time. We keep getting all these signals to stop talking.
Yeah,
so thank you all so much. Thank you.